Welcome back to NTV today. As Ken told you and as you know by now, it's a very heavy day because it's budget day. We have been analyzing this budget since Monday, trying to see what we're expecting from the Cabinet Secretary for the Treasury. That is Henry Rotich. So lots of stuff we're going to be doing all through today. The budget speech itself is expected from around 3 p.m. He's reading it in the Houses of Parliament. We'll then go into a little post thing. Then there's something in the evening during the 9 o'clock news that we'll try and see how much you can get out of that. And don't forget, all over our online platforms, our social media platforms, the Business Daily, the NTV one, the Daily Nation one, all of them, including Taifa Leo, we'll try and bring as much insight as we can, breaking down the numbers for you. For now, we're back to our usual crew analyzing the budget from RSM.
Budget analysis in association with RSM.
So I was joking and saying that these guys can probably now start hosting my shows. Ashif looks excited by that. I offered him a job yesterday. I'm offering him another one.
I think my partners will sack me if they hear I'm taking too many job offers.
Multitask, my friend. Multitask. It's always a good thing to multitask because there's a lot of stuff that we need to look at. And Sachin, again, welcome back.
Thank you.
Sachin is the consulting manager for RSM. Ashif is a host here at NTV, but his day job is executive chairman of RSM. We have spoken, on Monday we spoke about the tax issues and what we'll expect out of that. On Tuesday we spoke about sort of the broader budget. Yesterday we concentrated on the corporations. Today I want us to look at, and again feel free to pull in anything you want to pull in, but the speech itself. It obviously tends to create a huge amount of expectation. I know in your organization, for instance, as with any other of the kind, people go over and it's trying to break this thing down and come up with this neat thing that you can pass on to clients, saying this is what we saw out of the budget, this is how we expect it will affect you, and things like that. Today's speech, it's coming early, it's coming 3 months earlier than normal. It's not what it used to be in terms of what the budget speech was since we changed the constitution. Is it still that level of expectation, or is it now because a lot of the spending plans are known, a lot of the plans are already in place and they have been public, that it is not too much of that?
Yeah, I think that excitement with the budget overall has gone down, and there are three reasons for it. The budget's policy document is presented to the House in February, and there's not much change between what is presented on that day and the final numbers that come out. So you know where the main thematic areas of spending, the main revenue lines will come from. Secondly, in the olden days, a lot of the various tax acts were outdated, so they required a lot of changes. Today, what has happened is the VAT Act, excise duty, tax procedures are all, modern acts. So there is very little change coming around those. The only act that needs modernization now is the Income Tax Act, which they are looking at doing. So again, the changes that are expected are much lower than previously. The main area of changes in terms of pricing and other things come in the Excise Duty Act, but that again, as I said yesterday, it's fixed with indexation based on inflation.
But could you make a statement that changes that annual built-in increase, where either he comes in with a larger increase, if that's what he perceives it to be, or a lower increase, or whatever it is, that excess change, because if the excess change, it does have an effect on quite a number of things, very crucial things in the economy.
No, it's basically all the rates are listed, or the ad valorem rates are listed, and what happens is that every year they just go up by inflation. So those were fixed, and the aim was not to create a certainty to the manufacturers and to some of the larger service providers. So the rates, which are based on value, not on percentage, are increased by, inflation.
The point I'm making, though, and again, feel free to jump in, is there's a sort of cash crunch, although that may be too extreme a term to use, but there's a bit of crisis if you look at government finances. And we have been saying all week that the government has promised not to increase taxes, but at the same time, they do need more money. There's a lot of pressure coming in, and everyone now is feeling the urge to jump in on the conversation about the national debt. So there has to be something that will give. And what is that?
Wallace, I think what we need to look at first is where the journey began. The reality is that the journey was the blueprint that was set out for Vision 2030 and the drive to reach there. One of the things we need to ask ourselves is, at what cost are we doing the things? There's a lot of issues that we're not addressing, a lot of wastage, leakage, whichever way you want to look at it, inefficiencies in procurement, corruption and the like. So we need to be able to find out, more importantly, how we're going to address those issues rather than increase taxes.
But is that the remit of the finance minister, though? I mean, that's...
No, it has to be a multi-agency approach. That's the reality. Because the finance minister can put in his numbers, but the actual implementation and should be driven to the other agencies.
But the thing is, what I was driving at with that question is that talk is cheap, without disrespecting anyone, including the president, who's talked about fighting corruption and things like that. Talk is cheap, saying we will curb wastage, we will reduce corruption and everything, and it's a huge amount. If you look at the amounts that people talk about, it's in the possibly hundreds of billions of shillings. The finance minister, his only job is to stand up there and say, we have this much that we want to spend, so therefore we'll intend to raise that money through these routes. I'm not sure it's his place to stand up and say, we will try and fight corruption. You've had that message before. That's what I was getting to.
I think, Wallace, in that area, what is happening is that the procurement was supposed to be centralized with the finance ministry,
yes,
through IFMIS, okay? And one of the critical outcomes of IFMIS was going to be that, one, you would benchmark your procurement. Number two, you would know what is being procured. Yes, the procurement process is done by each of the companies. But if you benchmarked your procurement, especially for the common items, and Morocco did that and did very successfully, okay? Malaysia did that and did it very successfully. You can cut a lot of wastage. To me, time has come when your backs are against the wall that you can't raise taxes. Okay, the economy will not support a higher rate of taxation. The government services are not totally, giving value for money. Number three, we have a lot of expectation from the people of what is required, but that expectation is not coming back in terms of benefits to the people. And number four, the bureaucracy that the Constitution and the structures around the Constitution have created. And to me, we are now, if we can't analyze and find the savings, in fact, President himself in his speech said that they have to cut public spending. Okay, and the figure that he was giving, working backwards on the percentages, was 153 billion shillings is what you can cut based on what he said. Okay, but the problem today is that the finance minister is really the accountant of the country, and a lot of times it's the accountant who lays the overall policy of spending. Okay, so while he can't control anything, he can give an outline of what that policy is and then enforce it. And enforcement, he requires other agencies to help him, which is the judiciary.
But if I was to take that analogy of the finance minister being an accountant, he reports to a CEO, and in this case, the CEO of the country has a political obligation to fulfill certain things. He will promise a road here, he'll promise a dam there, all of which costs money, and not all of them are necessarily economically logical, to put not too fine a point on it. How does he balance that? Because he'll come and say, sorry, sir, this is the cabinet meeting. We do not have enough money for you to promise every county a road. The president comes and says that, listen, we have an obligation to the people of Kenya. We have to present each county the road. I'm being very crude and broad here. But in effect, that's a feeling I get that he has to play. Because ideally what he would say is, guys, cut down all the spending. We do not have enough money. We have these huge interest payments coming up. So we're going to be in a crisis. So please make sure we don't spend more than we have. But it's a political question.
It used to be true earlier when promises were made outside. Okay, now I think the budget process is slightly more refined. They go through the numbers, they look at the numbers, and the budget is actually a spending plan, and they know where things are going. And a lot of the high level things that are being done are really to benefit the institution. So if you read in health sector, okay, the biggest amount of the 37 billion that's going to be spent on health, 9.5 is for Kenyatta Hospital, okay, and another 6.2 is for Moi. A total of 15 billion over the 37 billion is for these two items. 4.5 billion is for leasing of equipment. Okay, so the overall strategy of what needs to be given is clearly laid down. The problem is the enforcement at the procurement time, that we are not paying more than we should be paying. And I think that is a big letdown, because IFMIS is not coming on board. And if IFMIS was working today in the way it was envisaged to work, they'd earmarked, I think, about 3 or 5,000 items, I don't remember, but it was quite a large number of items, which would have a set price between a small range. Okay, so a pen, would be between 8 and 12 shillings, example. Okay, and if you ever processed a pen of more than 12 shillings, it would be out. A computer of certain spec was going to be between 50 and 70,000 shillings. So you put an 80,000 shillings computer, it would be out.
But does that reflect reality? I remember when this whole argument went on about these very expensive pens that were bought and everything, and we all laughed at it, and someone came very quietly and said, it's not so much that this individual pen costs 80 shillings, let's say a ballpoint pen. It's that someone has to build in all these inefficiencies in government. I'm going to be paid late. I'm going to submit my invoices and get them paid after a year. So I need to include cost of financing and all these sort of things. So we might have the ideal situation where you say a pen should cost 12 shillings, but you're asking me to take the hit because government has no obligation to pay me early.
And again, coming back to the procurement system, all these have to be taken into account. And one of the advantages of IFMIS was going to be that as soon as a county or a national government department processes that LPO, the payment would be centralized. And so money would not go to the county government, come back to the national government. The national government would pay that money automatically. So you would have one-stop shop and you could track your payments. So you would know where you are. The whole idea of IFPIS was to bring that transparency. Okay, so you would then price and know that, okay, government will pay you within 6 months, that's a normal norm, and you would price that 6 months, not an uncertain value of 9, 12, 15, 18 months, you don't know when you'll get paid. And that certainty was what IFPIS was going to bring.
Companies, and because there's an estimate, but the rough one is about 30% of all the economy, the whole economy is government services. So government itself providing services, private companies providing services to government, individuals procuring services from government. It's a huge part of the economy. Your clients are private companies, and if government is A, this inefficient, and B, things are so unsure, surely they must be suffering from a perspective where they're not sure how much tax they'll pay next year.
I mean, the way we should look at it is in a way that the first thing is, building on what Ashif has said, is what are we building in the country? We're trying to build human capital. We're trying to make Kenya a regional hub for having good access to human capital. Okay, and we're doing the right things to that extent. We are now at the forefront of offering free primary education, secondary education, trying to get our tertiary education in line as well. The other thing that we need to look at is the collection of taxes from our revenue authorities. I mean, we alluded to the fact clearly that there is unlikely to be increase in taxes, but gaining more efficiencies in collecting taxes. For example, they wanted to front load the collection of VAT by having this withholding VAT concept introduced as well, So we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Doesn't that just increase cost to companies?
It does, and that's the thing. That's why we're having companies, our private companies, saying that our cash flow is constrained,
There's something before you jump in, Ashif. Budget doesn't just affect the national government and people sitting in treasury and corporations and everything. It affects a common person. And so Peter Mangangi was out on the streets of Mombasa just asking people what they're expecting out of today's budget speech. We'll take a look at that because I want you guys to respond to what people are saying. So we'll come back to that in just a second from the streets of Mombasa. But if we are to take that into consideration right now, I remember, I'm old enough to remember, I think it was back in the 80s, up until about 1994, I believe, when a lot of the things were under price control. So Budget Day was a huge thing. There were songs composed about Budget Day because that's the day the minister would say bread is increasing from 2 shillings and 75 cents to 3 shillings and 50 cents. That kind of thing. That's no longer the case. Why should then, I don't call him a common Mwananchi, but just a man on the street or the woman on the street care so much about this budget? Because a lot of it seems to be esoteric.
I think there are still 2 or 3 things that come out from the budget. Is the government's, it's a government statement annually.
Yes.
As to where they are going to spend the money and what are the priority areas. And that affects the Mwananchi directly. Okay. The second aspect that comes to the businesses is while the budget doesn't make a lot of changes, but remember all excise duty, if they are due excise duty or the customs duties are increasing, they are all announced as part of the budget.
Yes.
Okay, and so businesses still need to keep a watch. But there are also a number of acts that are coming through or bills that are introduced through the budget process that make the administration of tax much more easier. So yes, it's not the breadth of the items that are covered in the budget, but it's the depth of some of the consequences of the policy decisions that are coming out that can affect businesses. Like the special economic zone enterprises, okay, was announced through the budget process. And the tax and other things of people who are planning would come on this day.
But why would I sit there if I'm a guy who comes from home in, I don't know, South B, go to work in industrial area, come back home, how, I'd expect, yes, my bosses would be caring because if the excise duty goes up, then it means my goods, the goods that I'm producing might change in price, whatever it is. But I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, this thing has nothing to do with me at a personal level. It might affect my job, yes, but day to day.
But I think globally, if you look at the budgets, it's the same like Kenya. The modern Kenyan budgeting is like what happens in the UK or in the US, okay? And people still see it because that is one day in a whole year, in that 2 hours, that your finance minister will tell you, your cabinet secretary will tell you what is the government's plan for the year and what is it going to do, with the economy. But interestingly, a lot of the statistics that are here, in the documents that we carry are because of analysis, okay? And this 18-page document I have here in front of me is actually summarizing over 400 pages of data, okay? So people don't have that time. So that's also one time in a year where the minister within that 1.5 to 2 hours tells you the entire sum of data that exists all over the place and how it all comes together.
Do you know, there's actually a question that a lot of people asked after 2010, which was, the ritual is important and this whole communal thing of the guy carrying the briefcase and holding it up to the cameras. But I said in this new dispensation, it's actually an unnecessary thing. Just, you don't even need to read a speech. The thing is there. In the US, I don't think the Treasury Secretary makes any speech to anyone. It's just submitted. So the president goes, submits his budget to Congress. It's a big, thick document. So this, in some respects, is an unnecessary ritual.
It is. Some countries have dispensed with it, but as I said, I rather listen to that speech for 2 hours and understand what the government plan for the next year is. The beauty is we never follow it up. So we hear what he says, and the next year he'll come, and some of the items are repeated, which have not been done. We never question that. So the accountability of the budget is what I would look. It's not the 2-hour ritual. I think it's good for everybody to know what the government is doing over the 2 hours. But is there an accountability statement? We didn't do this, and these were the consequences of this, and this is the people who are held accountable.
But they never say that. Speaking about the people, like we told you, Peter Mwangangi was out on the streets of Mombasa, speaking to literally the man on the street, asking them what the expectations are from the the Treasury Cabinet Secretary's speech this afternoon to Parliament.
Thank you. We are coming to you live from Polana, that is the People's Parliament, otherwise known as Bunge la Mwananchi, here in Mombasa's Central Business District. This is the epicenter of all politics locally here in Mombasa, as well as nationally. This is where people congregate to talk about politics and what is happening in the country. And of course, today is budget day, and we want to hear what their views are in terms of their expectations. And I have a lot of them standing right behind me and even on the sidelines. And I want to go straight and talk to them. Sir, tell us your name and your expectations today.
I'm called Michael Magak. I'm a veteran human rights campaigner in Mombasa. I've lived here for over 30 years. And today is a critical day for the people. I'll talk basically about the expectation of the common man. We expect Mr. Henry Rotich, the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury, to give us a budget that considers the interests of the common mwananchi.
Like what?
First and foremost, we expect him to have put subsidies for the basic foodstuffs. We hope he has put subsidy for maize so that Wananchi can get maize at an affordable price. The escalating prices of basic foodstuffs is hurting Wananchi very, very adversely. And it is important that it is our expectation that the government will take measures in this budget that will mitigate against the impact of these escalating prices of basic food commodities like maize. Basically, we want to know what Rotich is doing to mitigate the impact of the escalating price of sugar, the escalating price of milk, and other basic food that Mwananchi use and depend on day-to-day basis. On the larger scale, we hope there is a fiscal policy in place that will ensure that Article 43 on the social rights of Wananchi of Kenya is actualized. One thing, people have the right to housing, and we hope that has been taken care of in the budget, how it will make sure all Kenyans who require housing will get housing, and basic education, which is universal and free and compulsory for all our children. We hope enough has been allocated so that this can be actualized and realized for the benefit of all Kenyans. Another thing, we hope that Henry Rotich has ensured in this budget that he has enough funds to finance it so that we don't have a huge deficit gap that will make him come back to the local market to borrow so heavily that will make credit unavailable to the local micro and macro business people. Because if he borrows heavily from the local market or abroad, it will add into the very huge loan that the government, which is standing at almost over 80% of the GDP as we talk now. And that is not sustainable.
Let's talk about health, for example. What is your expectation on that particular aspect?
We have seen a huge crisis in the health sector of late with the strike of doctors that lasted for over 100 years, which
100 days.
100 days, which have affected the people of Kenya so adversely. Those statistics are not available. But we know so many people died out of this, and so many people suffered out of this. We expect that this has been catered for in the budget so that the doctors are remunerated at a rate that is acceptable to them, and also who can make them as professionals in the society to be looked upon by those who are aspiring to be doctors. We expect that equipment in hospitals have been catered for in this budget so that we have enough equipment for diagnosis and other measures in hospitals. We expect this budget to have enough funds for the purchase or procurement of enough medicine for the people of Kenya, particularly for public hospitals. And we expect enough money to be transferred to the county governments so that they can implement those functions that they have been given by the Constitution of Kenya.
Because there are many people also lined up to speak, let me ask you the final question. It's an election year. What is your expectation on that side?
We want a free, fair, and democratic elections. We know
in terms of budgets.
Elections are expensive affairs. And we hope IEBC has been allocated enough funds to carry out free and fair elections. Another thing, there is the offshoot of elections, which is the security. The security aspects must be looked at critically, because without securing the lives and property of Kenyans during the electoral process, Kenyans will go to elections with a lot of worries and fears. And we don't want any politics of fears. And to mitigate that politics of fear, we need enough funds for security to secure the elections and potential conflicts and even post-election conflict. This to be done, there must be enough allocation for security purposes in this budget.
Thank you, Magak. Let me just go and talk to another Kenyan standing right here. If you can just join here. Tell us your name and your expectation.
Yes, my name is Rafael Odieny Wakaya, aspirant in the Walangombe Ward 2017.
You don't have to say all that, but just tell us your expectation.
My expectation is not much as per the budget concerning what we have experienced for the last 4 years. Because for the last 4 years, our Kenyans went to election with a lot of expectation of reducing the price of commodities, e.g. rice, maize, and some essential commodities in terms of the standard of living for Kenyans. But as per now, we have seen 4 or 5 years down the lane, we have seen a lot of crises in terms of hunger, in terms of strikes, doctors, or teachers.
So what is your expectation?
My expectation is not much in terms of the budget, because we have seen it is just a normal budget in terms of Kenyans, because we have seen a budget of 2.6 trillion. But in terms of fiscal or in terms of statistics, we can read them on papers, but in terms of common mwananchi, it's not even filling that budget as per the expectation. So my expectation as Rafael Odenywakaya, I'm still looking Henry Rotich to dig more into details so that Kenyans can get out of hunger.
My final question, what area do you expect it to have more allocation maybe, and why?
More allocation I expect on agriculture, and more so on security. And the third, which is very critical, is health sector and security.
Thank you. Let me just talk to another Kenyan here. Tell us your name, your expectation for the budget.
My name is David Ochieng Ongondo, aspirant of Junda.
Please just tell us your expectation.
My expectation of the budget that we have today, probably, if the government could work on the health sector and the agriculture being given the best allocation, then I believe Kenya will be in a better position. Because when we see and we walk around, you meet the common mwananchi having a serious problem, and then probably this can only be worked on if the agriculture sector and the health sector can be improved by being given the best allocation so far.
What do you mean when you say best allocation? What exactly do you maybe expect to be funded exactly?
I can't talk of the exact amount to be funded, but I would wish that the government improve the amount that they gave the last budget to be increased to a better level, so that be more easier to be spread on the other countries, to make it efficiency for the common mwananchi.
This is an election year. In August, we'll be having the general election. Maybe what is your expectation in terms of that particular aspect, in terms of the budget?
I wish I was there. I will give attention by giving money and the required amount that the IEBC needs, so that we have the most credible election that we've never had so far in Kenya. If that will be there, then I believe Kenyans will live after the voting day so happy that all that they need, all that they've chosen, all that they want has been done as it is required, as they wait for their incoming new president in future.
Well, we've seen many other budgets being read over the years. Every year there must be a budget. Maybe my final question to you, what do you expect this year will be different?
I believe it should be different because, one, we've gone through the 4 years, and the 4 years has become so cumbersome to the common mwananchi that has made things change. Example, when you see the price of unga today has gone down to 200 shillings, which initial years we couldn't see that. So I just believe more attention should be given unto this budget than any other budget that we've ever had before.
Thank you so much. Many people here still expressing their sentiments. If you could just join us and give us your sentiments as well. Tell us your name and your expectation.
My name is Raymond Makokeo, and currently my expectations with the budget of Jubilee government is not much, because we have experience for the past 4 years and even several other years. The last budget in an electioneering year has never been so effective, because you find it is put in so many figures to hoodwink voters. So we are not really expecting much, and as Kenyans we know we are fighting for the third and the final liberation, and that is our commitment. And we are not focusing much on the Jubilee budget today. We are focusing much on liberating Kenya on the 8th August 2017.
Thank you very much. Let me just talk to the final person here and tell us your name and your expectation for this year's budget very quickly.
Yes, kwa majina naitwa Jared Otieno. Mimi mfanya hapa biashara hapa Mombasa. Kwa maoni yangu ninaona kwamba bei ya unga iko juu. Wakati watasoma hii budget ya mwaka huu, waangalie bei ya unga sana. Kwa sababu sasa hii ni bei ya unga ni 160. Hiyo wananchi wa kawaida wanakufa sana. Sasa ninaomba serikali waangalie hiyo kitu vizuri kabisa.
Na labda swali langu la mwisho, huu ni mwaka wa uchaguzi, labda unatarajia budget itakuwa kwa upande wa uchaguzi itakuwa vipi?
Kwa upande wa uchaguzi kwa budget, kitu ambayo ninataka serikali waangalie kwanza, waangalie wananchi wa chini kwanza. Hiyo wakati wa uchaguzi, tafadhali wakati wa uchaguzi waangalie budget yao waweke tu sawa, kwa sababu ya wananchi wa kawaida ndio wanateseka. Yeah.
Asante sana. Thank you so much. Many of the residents here expressing their sentiments on their expectation. Many of their sentiments are being directed towards the issue of food prices. They are saying that they expect subsidies on that particular side. They are also raising concerns about what will happen to the health sector, the education sector, and agriculture, and many other sectors here in the country. And I'm sure they'll be watching keenly later today to see how that plays out. We are live from Polana, that is the People's Parliament here in Mombasa. You will not be surprised to meet many aspirants and people who come here for some politics, both here, which centers in Mombasa and nationally as well. For now, over to you in studio.
Thank you very much, Peter. Peter is on the streets, believe me, of Mombasa in Coast Province. Well, Coast is no longer a province, but of the coast. People speak about the fiscal plans of the government. Man, geez, you know, I thought this man on the street interview was going to be man on the street. These are potential finance ministers. Guys actually do know what is important to this budget. Actually, I'll be honest, surprises me at the level of detail at which people are willing to go into when they're doing this budget analysis out on the streets.
No, it is. And that's what I was telling you, that once a year, everybody follows what is coming out.
Everyone becomes an expert.
Yeah, it's true. And you know that, and you know, the budget planning is not a bad thing. The way the budget is planned here is very good. I think it's the implementation, and if the Wananchi can be told how the budget was implemented, when things were wrong, how did the direction change course, and who was responsible for not implementing it, and what was done with that. And I think when you ask about why businesses are suffering, I think that we have a complete devolution system, but we don't have an HR, in the government that can address the needs of the Wananchi and respond to those needs on a very pragmatic basis. And I think that is what we are lacking. And the earlier question is what can be done. It's really bringing that performance to reality and taking that action. And it's happened. There are good places in the world where governments have just suddenly changed how the public sector interacts with the private sector and the general public, and they've just changed the entire running of the government within a very short span of 1 to 2 years.
There was a cash crunch with the government back in 2015, the very serious one around September, October. And some people say that a crisis is the best time for you to change around how you're working. Now, from what Ashraf is saying is that we need to rework how the government operates in terms of it makes promises, it needs to fulfill those promises. One would have thought that crisis would have led to a different way of doing things. It didn't seem to change much.
Let's look at it slightly differently. I mean, what Ashif's basically talked about is complete accountability and responsibility.
Yes.
What we have to look at is the crisis that we supposedly experienced hasn't changed the course of the country much either. And maybe that's a reason because we handled it well. If we didn't handle it well, then we would be talking totally different things today.
But from what we understood about that crisis, the issue was we just simply didn't match up our revenues and how they come in. It's a basic cash flow issue. So your revenues are coming in, tax revenues, VATs and all those sorts of things. You expect them on certain dates, but yet what you have done is you have outgoings that are coming on certain dates, and this simply didn't match up. So the government ends up in a situation where they realize they don't have money. So the money is there, yes, but from a pure cash flow position, cash flow handled badly. Now, one would expect that someone would say, you know what, one of the best ways to increase your cash is to simply kill corruption, or at least try and handle it as best as you can. That didn't happen. It was a wasted crisis.
Yeah, corruption is one avenue, but we're losing money in different ways as well. For example, I was just reading a couple of reports before we came in. We're losing about 25 billion shillings due to traffic congestion. Can we do something to address that? Another interesting fact that I read.
Long term, though.
Yeah, but the fact remains is we need to be able to gain efficiencies in other areas. Very recently, and it's interesting, the other gentleman talked about security. I read something so staggering is that we lost about $165 million in cybercrime.
That's
That's 16.5 billion. That's the value allocated to the budget between Nairobi and Naivasha this year.
My word.
Yeah. I mean, we can look at different things and be able to gain efficiencies elsewhere.
These are young guys on, okay, my laptop is not engaged in cybercrime right now. I'm simply trying to work out the budget. So please don't suspect me. You're scared. What?
Yeah.
16 billion shillings.
Yeah.
Since we're not going to sort out corruption anytime soon, since we're not going to sort out inefficiencies anytime soon, are you saying we're back to the hamster wheel, going back and round in circles?
Yeah, we'll keep on borrowing, and we borrow every year we'll borrow the 200-300 billion shillings to keep on funding our expenditure. And while we'll say the economy is growing, so the borrowing as a percentage of GDP is fine, I've always believed a shilling of borrowing when you can't repay it is very high, and a trillion shillings in borrowing, if you can repay it, is not high. And the issue is that all governments that are in this habit of borrowing just borrow and compare it to the percentage of GDP, but the number keeps on increasing. And that always creates, in a long term, a big bubble of debt that a country has. And then people start holding you to ransom. If you look at China, Chinese debt, it comes cheap, it's concessional, but when you can't pay it...
But some people say it's actually more expensive than that.
Yeah, no, it's cheap, it's concessional in a number of ways.
Yes, okay.
It is very fast, but when you can't pay it, they want other benefits. They want these many work permits.
Remember the time they grabbed an airport in Sri Lanka or something?
Yeah, they ask for other benefits to, for that debt to be repaid. And so there is a big cost to such debt when you can't repay it or when you go to, refinance it. The only good part is somebody told me that it doesn't matter. We have, built a road using debt. If we can't repay the debt, the road will always stay here.
No, but on a serious note, it sounds like a joke, but the Chinese I think it was 2 years ago, and there's a very serious story I was reading, two of them. One was an airport in Sri Lanka that the Chinese simply came and said, equivalent to us, we borrow for, say, the Standard Gauge Railway, or we borrow for any other developmental need. We can't repay. They come and say, we want an asset from you. And the best asset, because this asset is cash generating, we will take this, or it's strategically important. In this case, the airport was strategically important to them. The second one is when you come, I think it was a new Argentinian president who came and said, I will rework our relationship with the Chinese. It's been unfair, and the last government didn't do it properly. And within one meeting, he realized he actually couldn't do much. So it's not a joke. It actually is a serious thing.
It's happening, and I think one of the issues that we need to realize in debt, is also that when you have such a lot of debt, when you're using 20% of your revenue to finance interest, there comes a time when your expenses have outweighed your income, and you can't even repay that interest. And there are governments in the world that have actually issued long-term bonds to repay interest.
So you're simply extending the term of your credit.
Yeah, you're just telling people that yes, we're giving you a piece of paper and we'll pay it. And that is the danger of debt.
And that's if the international bond markets are behaving as they should, because between us putting our bond in 2013 and now I'm told that the bond markets have turned.
We should look at it in another way as well, because just building up on Ashif's refinancing point, we've very timely launched the Amakiba bond.
Sorry to interrupt you. As we told you, we are in Kisii County. But first, we want to let you know the budget is going to go on at 3 p.m. this afternoon. We're still going to have the same people with us. That is at 3 p.m. on the budget.
Budget analysis in association with RSM.
So a quick one to note, we are in Kisii County, and the leader of the opposition, Raila Odinga, is just getting in, and Laban Cliff Onseri standing by from Kisii University to take us through that conference.